Straw Hut Media.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to my show, American Badass. We're on episode 3 already. I get to speak to so many of my wonderful friends and colleagues. So, yeah, I'm feeling really blessed right now. I've got another great guest for you this week, who I'm really excited about. I've worked with him twice on Welcome to Acapulco and Two Graves in the Desert. And I've also worked with his brother Alec in The Getaway. And I've worked with Daniel and Steven. You probably already know who I'm talking about. All right, get ready. I'm speaking with actor Billy Baldwin.
Hey, been a minute, man.
Yeah, it has. How long has it been, actually?
Last time we were in Europe together.
You and I and even Steven and Daniel, we're all kind of nicely connected. And I've enjoyed your Instagrams when you talk about your family and your kids and your recent things you've been through. And I especially remember a picture that you posted one day of you and Joe Namath.
Yeah.
What year was that?
That was 1973.
Wow.
And I was going to wrestling camp at Hofstra University. And we would finish our sessions for the day at like 3 p.m. And the Jets training camp was at Hofstra University. It used to be there before. When the Jets played in Shea Stadium, their training facility was at Hofstra until they moved over to the Meadowlands to play in Giants Stadium. Now they're out in East Rutherford or something. But back then, it was called Weeb Eubank Hall and Weeb Eubank Stadium. And we would finish the wrestling sessions and we would go out and watch the Jets play. And then we would hang around for their autographs.
Yeah, it looks like you guys were standing in a parking lot somewhere.
Yeah, and then when they would come out, we would get their autograph. And Namath had this Cadillac Eldorado convertible, and that was the day. That was the day that I met him, because I'm still holding it. I wish I could find it because I still have that. It says "To Bill, best wishes, Joe Namath, number 12," and I have that card in a scrapbook somewhere. And in that photograph, I'm holding that card and the pencil when I asked him for his autograph. And then he took us for a ride in the Cadillac Eldorado around the parking lot. And then we were in camp for multiple years we were there. So we sort of became friends with him, and he would always take us tooling around in his Cadillac Eldorado. And then when he went to the Rams for a year and came back to New York and took a run at a career in acting. And he tried to do a musical out of Jones Beach Theater. He did a summer where he did Damn Yankees.
Oh, no.
And that summer that he did Damn Yankees, he lived in my friend Christopher Dean. He rented my friend Christopher Dean's house. It was literally like 3 blocks from my house. So we would go up, and if the fucking Eldorado was in the driveway, we'd ring the doorbell. We had the friggin' pigskin in our hand, and sometimes he'd come out and he'd toss with us in the street. It was pretty cool.
I'll tell you a funny story about Deanna. She, when you first get together with somebody and you start sharing your past people or relationships, she told me, somehow Joe Namath came up, and she said, "Oh, I met Joe Namath." And right away I said, "Oh, really? So how well did you meet Joe Namath?" And she goes, No, it wasn't like that. And I said, "Well, then what the hell was it? What the fuck did you do with Joe Namath?" And she goes, "Michael, I bumped into him and dumped an entire cup of coffee all over the front of his clothes." He said, "Oh my God." She goes, "It was at an airport, and I was running around the corner, and I had this cup of coffee in my hand, and there was Joe Namath, and I ran right into him, and I dumped it all over him." And I said, "What did you do?" And she goes, "Well, I was so embarrassed, and he smiled at me, and I didn't know what to say. And so I turned around and I ran away."
Well, when the sentence starts with coming to your wife and she says, "Oh, I've met Joe Namath a couple of times," where I met Joe Namath, that's the ending that you're hoping for. Okay. That could have gone in an entirely different direction. I mean, nobody, when those pictures of him with those like $400 sunglasses and the fur coat sitting on the sidelines back when he was the quarterback for the New York Jets. I mean, there's only in sports, even though he only won one Super Bowl. I mean, I'm not comparing him to Tom Brady, but when it comes to being a cultural icon at the right time in the right city, you got to remember the Mets won the World Series that year, and the Jets won the Super Bowl that year. That was a big time in New York. The Miracle Mets won the World Series in '69, and the Jets won. And I know the Yankees didn't win. That's for sure.
How about those fur coats he used to wear? I mean,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah, and there's a kid here. There's a kid here. I'll tell you a funny story. There's a kid here that went to elementary school with my daughter, and I heard he was a big Joe Namath fan. I didn't know how he even knew who Joe Namath was because the kid's only 21 years old now. But when he was like 8 years old when I first moved here, he said he was a Joe Namath fan. And I had all these extra pictures, like from going to charity events. I'd buy a signed picture of Muhammad Ali, Joe Namath. I had like 3 copies of the picture of him sitting on the sidelines with the fur coat and the sunglasses. So his dad was friends of mine. I said, here's a gift for your son, Dane. Sure enough, the friggin' mudslide hits and this kid gets rescued. His house is being torn to shreds and ripped to pieces. And the house is being washed out into the ocean. And the father's down in LA because he's a professor at USC. And the mother's at home with the 2 boys. The house is being ripped apart. And the neighbors had to save them. Sure enough, the next day, the beach is cluttered. Like a couple of hundred homes were destroyed and everything was out on the beach. And they're walking down the beach to see if there's anything to salvage. And I'm not even sure if it was on the beach or somewhere in a creek bed or on their property. And they see something in the mud and they start smearing the mud away. And lo and behold, he was able to recover the friggin' Joe Namath picture that I gave him. He pulled it out of the mud.
Wow.
It was still intact. The glass was cracked, but he still had the picture of the Joe Namath. It survived the mudslide, the big mudslide we had up here a couple of years ago.
You want to know something funny? I know you're very fond of your father. And I've always noticed that you've made references to your dad. And I relate to that because I miss my dad very much. And a funny thing, the reason I'm telling you this story is because what you just told me, but our house burned down, in Malibu, in the Woolsey fire. We lost our house. The whole thing went up in flames. And about 3 days after the investigation was done and the insurance companies and all that, they allowed Deanna and I to go up there. And it looked like a bomb had dropped on the house, okay? And there was virtually nothing. It was just a giant pile of burnt stuff. And I walked around in the back of the garage and I was kicking my foot against some metal stuff. And a ring rolled out and fell down. And you know what, Billy? I picked it up and it's my dad's ring. It was my father's fire department ring. And how in the hell it got there? Because it had been up in my closet, which was on the 3rd floor of the house, and how it made it down to the bottom of the garage
intact.
Right there.
You don't remember. You and I were going through security.
Wow, man.
In Europe, and we were talking, and we were going through security in Italy or something. And I said, "What's that on your hand?" And you showed me the ring, and you told me the story that you're telling me now.
Yeah,
and which I should have started crying because it's so poignant and so beautiful because your father was one of Chicago's bravest for so many years. But I just started laughing so hard because the friggin' irony of the Malibu blaze that melted, like incinerated everything you had. You had like a safe in your house that I think the fire melted.
Yeah, everything inside of it was just reduced.
And you found the only thing that you found, I think it was this, maybe the sole surviving thing that mattered to you was your father's. Was it his retirement ring?
It's his. It was his when they made him a lieutenant before his retirement. It has a stone on it. Luke has it now.
You kind of looked at me kind of funny because I couldn't stop laughing. But then once we both started getting the joke, I mean, Michael, I was almost crying. I was laughing so hard that day when we were talking about that because I couldn't believe the irony of the only thing that came out of that blaze was your father's ring from the fire department when he made lieutenant. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, so that was a pretty emotional event for me, to say the least. Losing all your belongings surely puts into perspective what's important, I can tell you that. So let's take a quick break here, and when we come back, Billy and I will talk a bit more about life-changing events. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to my show, American Badass, and thanks for tuning in. And before the break, Billy and I spoke about the time when my house burned down. Yeah, that really happened. In Malibu, we lost everything, my family and I. all that was left was my father's firefighter ring. Oddly enough, my father was a firefighter, and he was honored with a ring when he became a lieutenant. And strangely enough, or ironically enough, I should say, that's all that survived from that incident. The house looked like a bomb had been dropped on it, and that ring had been in my closet up on the 3rd floor of the house. And I just kicked it out of the dust now in the driveway, which was all that was left. And so it was quite an emotional moment. And anyways, on to much happier things. So Billy and I, of course, were in lockdown like the rest of the world last year. And so we spoke a bit about that and how technology and social media helped us stay connected. And we both made some new online friends. You know, you've told so many stories in your Instagram about your growing up together with your brothers and your dad and stuff. And very touching stuff, Billy. And I think I remember once you made a good point about how everybody got life changed with the pandemic when we were all stuck in the house and we couldn't go do what we would normally be doing. But at the end, it seemed like everyone being stuck together brought everybody closer together in so many ways that we never could have imagined if we weren't stuck or locked up in a house, you know, in a pandemic.
Yeah, I remember saying something like, in a weird way, I felt closer to some people through the technology of the internet and social media. I felt like I had made such close friends with people that I had never met before through both Twitter and through Instagram. I felt like I had made connections and people had touched me and I had touched them in ways. And it was weird because I didn't,
it was cool though. It was nice.
I felt so close to, it was just weird feeling so close to people that you had never met before. In fact, there was a couple people who didn't necessarily like some of the things that I was saying and didn't agree with some of the things that I was saying on Twitter. And then I would publicly pose a question to them and they would say, I don't have a problem with that. And I'd say, well, what about this? And they say, of course I agree with that. And I say, well, what about this? And I literally I followed them, went into my private messages, sent them my cell phone number and said, do me a favor and call me. And there's one guy who's like a country and Western singer from Omaha, Nebraska, who's like become a really good friend of mine. And I'm like, we keep shouting at each other and you don't even realize that on a lot of these things that we think we don't agree, we have like we're in like 80% agreement. We agree on way more than we disagree on. So why are we fighting? Why aren't we talking? Let's have a relationship. Let's see where we could find common ground and consensus. And there's this country and Western singer from Omaha, Nebraska named Rowdy, who's become one of my dear friends. And I only met him through social media. I've never met him in my life. I FaceTimed him a couple of times. I feel like I know him, but I've never met the guy.
I met a guy in the same way that lives in Japan, and he made some comment. He made some asinine comment about something. And so I did the same thing. I commented back and I said, I'm sorry you feel that way, but, and I'm sorry you not live in America anymore. And so you can go fuck yourself. And then he commented back, oh, Michael, I never met you, and on and on and on. And it turns out that he's a guy who does books, audio. And, I've written a couple books, which nobody reads books anymore. And so they went nowhere, but he does audio books. And so we became friends, and I just finished my 3rd audio book with this guy from Japan, who originally I told to fuck himself because he made an asshole comment. So, it's strange. It's changed.
So he
people.
wrote the book and you did the narration for it?
I narrate stuff and I record stuff. I send it to him and then he puts it out as an audio book.
That's awesome.
Short stories and poems. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a great guy, man. And it's such a strange, I feel this sense that everybody is there's a weird, people are different because of this whole thing. There's a strange, false kind of friendship. And underneath it is this fuse that's about to go off. And it's just, do you know what I mean? It's just a strange, I don't know where it's all going. It's such a bizarre thing to have happen to people.
That's what's causing a lot of stress. I mean, between just the uncertainty with the economy and the craziness with stuff that's been going on politically, and then the isolation from quarantine and the pandemic, and not, trying to get this variant under control and getting the economy cranking again. But there's a lot of people that are like, no matter how much the economy gets cranking, they're worried about, which direction real estate's going and the stock market's going, and consumer confidence and of course inflation. We haven't had inflation for decades. We haven't really had inflation. Everyone's forecasting that the economy could tank in the next year or so, which is kind of scary.
I've seen more road rage than I used to notice. People are a lot more angry in their cars than I can remember, and I don't know where's that coming from. They're ready to get out and fight right in the street. If you cut in front of somebody, it seems like it's over, but then again, it seems like it's all starting again.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's pretty, if you keep it in perspective. And I know a lot of people will say, "Oh, sure, you two guys are in Hollywood and you live in California." I get people commenting all the time.
Right.
Poor Billy has to come out of his mansion and he's got to leave his butler. It's like, meanwhile, I wear jeans and a t-shirt. I drive a 2008 Prius.
Yeah. I know.
And, right now I'm sharing a car with China. I live in California, and my wife and I are sharing a car because I gave my son a car to go to college.
I have my wife's, I have Deanna's Prius. It's red. And about 2 months ago, I was on Sunset Boulevard, and I unfortunately stopped at a light right next to one of those tour buses. And I said, "Oh shit! Oh my god!" Right? and I tried to pretend like I didn't notice it, and I was just waiting for the light. And slowly, I know you know what I mean. You start to realize, "Oh shit! They know who I am. This is okay. I can't get out of this." And suddenly they're all staring over. "Oh my God, it's him, it's him." And then the driver, they have a microphone. Like, "Ladies and gentlemen, do you see who's next to us?" "Oh my gosh, it's Michael Madsen." And I'm like, "Oh, hey." And I wave up at them, and then he goes, "And he's driving a Prius." I felt like the biggest idiot in the world. Oh my God. Suddenly I was reduced to this crumb of a person. I should have been sitting there. I should have been in a Stingray or, a Lincoln Continental. The rest of their lives are going to say, "You know what? We were parked next to Michael Madsen at a red light, and he's driving a Prius."
I've been driving one since 2008.
That's my life.
Yeah.
That's the reality of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm developing a series concept that's sort of, I guess if you were to, it's based on our childhood and the men who raised guys like you and me. My father was a high school football coach. He was a Brooklyn street kid. Then he was in the Marine Corps for 5 years. Then he went to Syracuse University, played football there and got his undergraduate and his master's in political science. He became a high school teacher and a football coach. And we had a rifle team. There was a rifle range in the high school. And my father was the rifle coach, did both of those, all three of those, teaching and coaching football and rifle for 30 plus years. And
that's just the way, that's good stuff.
The way men raised us, like the way your father raised you as a firefighter in Chicago, and me being in the suburbs of New York, and my father being from Brooklyn. And it's like, I'm developing this series concept that's sort of like the Wonder Years if Quentin or Scorsese, it's like mixing the Wonder Years with Goodfellas. You know what I mean? And
that's a good idea. I'd be on that.
Yeah, but you look back at the way when I tell people, Michael, stuff that happened to during my childhood,
they're shocked,
and they look at me kind of cross-eyed, like there was something wrong with my father. I said, "You don't understand. That wasn't going on in my house. It was going on in every other house on my block, and the next block, and the next block, and the next block. If you were a Jewish kid or an Italian kid or an Irish kid, and there was two sides of the track. There were doctors and lawyers and bankers, and there were cops and teachers and firemen and iron workers and union electricians. If you were on my side of the tracks and your father was, primarily if they were German, Irish, and Italian, there's a certain way in which stuff was handled. that was highly common and highly routine.
Sure.
I tell them stories about the stuff. My father ran the Cub Scouts, and the Cub Scout meetings were once a month in the elementary school. And once in a while, my father would say, don't bring him here next month when we have the meeting, bring him over to the rifle range.
Yeah.
And he would say, just drop him off Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. My father had nobody's permission. Not the principal, not the chairman, not the superintendent of the school. Nobody even knew, except for the janitor that was pushing the broom past the rifle range at 10:30 on Saturday morning. And my father would have 15 9-year-olds, and he would open the cage and he'd hand everybody a rifle. And we'd go out into the hallway and we'd disassemble the weapons, clean them, put them back. He'd teach you how to take it apart, clean it, put it back together. And none of us were big enough to fire in a prone position. So we would, in a standing, kneeling, or prone. So we'd lay down on a big giant like military sandbag, and we would fire live rounds downrange for hours. And my father would teach us gun safety and how to accuracy. Would teach us how to fire the weapon properly. After the kids got good, he'd let you make like a Frankenstein or one of those big Frankenstein or Godzilla models, and then he put it downrange. He'd let us shoot the shit out of it. And could you imagine that a teacher at Malibu High School right now
they go to jail.
telling
they'd
15
arrest
kids
them and put them to jail.
You'd be fired. You'd be fired immediately.
Billy,
the way things are. Yeah,
I think it's very sad, Billy. I honestly do. I think what you're talking about and the kind of dads that we had. My father would pick me up out of bed, and if I slept overnight at the firehouse, he'd actually slide the pole. He could pick me up in his right arm and jump on the pole and slide down to the truck with me. I mean, that's like Batman or something. I mean, that's like, he was a hero to me. He was my dad, was like, and I think now about the way the parents are controlled and the kids are just, I don't know what's happened to. I know what you mean when you tell people stories. When I say things about my dad or things that happened between my father and I, or I try to talk about, something that was normal, people, they look at you like, oh my God, really, he should have been arrested or he should have been put away, or it's so sad. Billy,
and it sounds like times like when they invented the cotton gin or the steam engine. This wasn't 150 years ago. This was just one generation before. Yeah. I tell people this story about, I went to this when I was in 10th grade. My brother Daniel was a senior, and his whole class was going to the senior prom, and they were going with the cool kids and the hot chicks and everything. And the girls all had a friend that was a very, very sweet girl, but they were afraid she was very quiet. They were afraid somebody might not ask her. And the guys pulled me aside. They said, would you take her to the prom? I'm like, are you kidding me? A 10th grader going to the senior prom? I'm in, man. I don't care. I'll go for sure.
Shit,
so I asked her to the prom, and we lived, one of the girls we went with, her name was Martine. She lived on the Great South Bay, and she had a boat. And back then, they build the docks, the bulkhead that would go out on the property line. So you wouldn't have to build two docks. It was one side of the dock was for one home, and the other side of the dock was for the home next door. So you put your boats on one side, and the neighbor put their boats on the other side. And at we were after hours. The prom ended at we got back to her house at 2. It's probably 3:45 in the morning. Her date, Greg, says, hey, let's go out in the dock. Let me show you the Halpern's new boat. So I go out on the dock, and there's this guy. I'm out there with my friend Greg, and we're checking out the boat. And you remember that scene, of course, in Pulp Fiction, I think when Alexis Arquette comes out with a gun and fires like 15 rounds around Sam Jackson's head, screaming, and not one of them hits us. All of a sudden, just like that scene, this guy next door comes running out of the house in his underwear and his T-shirt with a gun, and he goes running across the lawn screaming, and he comes running down the dock screaming, and he's pointing this gun at me, and he's freaking out. Get down, get the fuck down, get down, motherfucker. I'm like, dude, we're at the prom. He goes, I go, look at the house. This is Martine. We're checking out Martine's boat. Everybody's still in the house. There's still 30 people. Look at the house. The lights were on. Music was playing. People were dancing. We were trying not to be too loud because it was 3:30 in the morning. The guy starts to panic. My friend Greg had already gotten changed into his jeans, and he was about to jump off the dock and jump into the water. He was so scared. And I did the stupid mistake. I said, my father used to call me Ignatz. And I looked at the guy and I said something like, hey, Ignatz. And I grabbed my tuxedo. I said, did you think I rented this tuxedo so I could rob you to rob your boat? And because I was still wearing this rented tuxedo. Like, you think I rented this to rob your boat?
Right.
And the guy comes at me with the butt of the gun and he goes, and he hits me and says, shut up. And, he panicked. He panicked. He let us go. And a couple months later, I'm sitting around the kitchen table and we have a couple of the guys that were there that night, Daniel and a few of the guys that were there that night. And a friend of ours is up from Florida and they tell him the story. And my father was cooking us breakfast and my father had selective hearing. If you asked him for $5 to go to the movies, he was deaf. But if I said to Daniel, like, do that again and I'll fucking kill you, he could hear you from like 10 blocks away. He was like, Billy! So I didn't think my father could hear. And I was telling the story to the whole gang at the table. And I kept looking over at the kitchen, at the stove. My father was scrambling some eggs or something. And he wasn't reacting at all. And I was like, and then all of a sudden I said, hey, Ignatz, you think I rented this tuxedo to rob your boat? And then the guy pistol whipped me, hit me in the head with a gun. And all of a sudden, my father slowly turns from the stove and he had these bifocals on and he looks over the top of his glasses and he said, what did you just say? And I said, Dad, whoa. This was a long time ago. It was not a big deal. It was a long time ago. It was only like 3 months earlier, not 10 years. He goes, get in the car.
We're
I'm like,
go
Dad,
visit,
he goes, get in the
visit.
car.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, all of Daniel's friends who were all seniors, and this is like the summer after they graduated, they're like, holy shit, this is on. And they all friggin' feared my father.
Sure.
They called him Cinder. They called him Cinder, short for cinder block, because he had a head like a fucking cinder block. I got to send you a picture of this great picture of my father. Legendary picture. I'm going to send it to you. So we get in the car, we go down to Martine Halpert's house. I go, here's the next door neighbor. This is the dude. He goes, stay in the car. He walks up to the door. He rings the doorbell. The door opens. They exchange words for about 10 seconds. The door slams shut. My father grabs the screen door, rips the door open. The front door goes down. He blows the whole thing off the frame, goes right through the friggin' door. My father was 5'11", 255, goes right through the door. I hear the sound of like shouting and grunts and cursing and crashing furniture and like feral animal sounds, like the sounds of an animal like that they make when they know that they're gonna die.
Yeah.
I heard these like weird squealing sounds.
Yeah.
Didn't last long. It lasted probably 20, 30 seconds. My father comes out, his shirt's ripped, his buttons are popped off, his shirt is untucked, his big guts kind of hanging out, his hair's all a mess, he's heaving, he's way out of breath. Like he was so out of shape. He gets in the car, he's tucking his shirt back in, coming across the lawn. He gets in the car, he tilts the mirror, he starts fixing his hair in the mirror like this. He starts the car, he goes to grab it to put it into gear, and he looks at me and goes, don't ever tell your mother what just happened. Drops it into drive and we take off. And of course I told my mother. My father died like not long after that, but my father went down there and just took this motherfucker out to the woodshed. And my father would do anything. If you were wrong on principle, if you screwed up and disrespected somebody, he would never side with you. If you were his son, he would never side with you if you were wrong.
Right,
but he would never let anybody disrespect our family. He would never let anybody put any of his children in harm's way.
I think those are the best lessons that I think are missing nowadays from especially fathers and sons, because my dad would throw me up in the cab of the fire truck and, I'd go with him because he drove the engine, the 129 on 81st and Ashland. And I was like 8 years old, 9 years old. But I couldn't get out of the truck when they'd get to whatever was on fire. I'd have to sit in the cab and I just watch these guys put the ladders up and put the house out and whatever they had to do. And then when it was done, he would bring me in the house and say, son, I want you to see what happens, inside a house after it's been on fire, it's been put out. And I would see things in there, Billy, that were just so I'd never get out of my head, just horrible, terrible. The massacre and the destruction of the flames and what they had done to people. And one time I used to have to help to roll up the hoses, and you have to roll them to push the water out of them, to roll them back up to put them on the truck. And I was out there doing that, and he went back inside in the back like patio of this house, and I looked at it, I didn't know where he was, and I went in there. And I go, Dad, what's going on? And there was a man in there who had been trying to get out, and he wasn't able to find the door. And he had fallen forward against the wall, and a great big drape or something that was hanging up on the wall had fallen over the guy's body. And so it looked like a table in the corner. And my father was there with a couple other guys. And right when I walked in, one of them pulled off the cloth. Mm-hmm. And there was this poor guy bent over, completely burnt to a crisp.
Yeah.
And he rolled backwards. His body rolled backwards onto the floor, and he kind of burst it open. And I looked at my father, and he looked at me, and he walked over to me, and he put his hand over my eyes, and he turned me around, and he walked me outside. He goes, "Listen, I know you're never going to forget that, and I wish you'd never seen that." And I said, "Oh my God, Dad," He goes, "Listen, son, this is what I do for a living, and that's the way it is." Mm-hmm. And he goes, "But listen, don't tell your mother." I said, and I couldn't believe you just told me that, because he said the same thing to me. Don't ever tell your mother what you saw today. And I didn't tell her until probably 10 years later. But
because with all of our kids, there's certain things that I lied through my teeth. When my kids said to me when they were 5, 6, 7 years old, "Dad, have you ever had a cigarette?" or "Dad, have you ever done drugs?" I was like, "Me? No." But, now I love telling them stories about like the hijinks of, college and partying and the club scene in New York and partying with my brothers, their uncles. And now I feel like it's smarter and safer. If I had told them, some of the things that happened when if I'd exposed them to that at an age when they were just emotionally not in the right, they weren't strong enough or mature enough to understand the meaning of it,
I never told any of my boys stuff that they would always ask me, like, Dad, like when you were, when you did this or when you did that, and, back in your time, you mean when I had my pet dinosaur? He goes, "Yeah, you remember, Dad, did you?" I'd say, no, I was a good kid. And I got in trouble once in a while, but nothing really bad ever happened. And it wasn't until years later when I started being honest with them and telling them stuff. And I began to feel like this hero, and they looked up to me like, "Wow, Dad, my dad is a bad motherfucker. My dad's a tough guy, man. What a great father we have." And it was such a strange transition to suddenly just find a way to be honest, but to know that if I had said all that to them when they were so much younger, I'm so glad I didn't, because I wouldn't want to have them ever try to emulate those things or try to not understand that it was a different time, and times were different and people were different back then, especially fathers and sons.
I mean, we live in such an era of the whole timeout generation and the whole participation trophy generation,
right?
And the political correctness of the times that we live in. It's like I can't even tell you how many fights I got into. I got into hundreds of fights. I used to fight my brother Dan. I mean, I didn't really fight him. I just took the beating. But where I was in 9th grade, I wrestled 98, and Daniel was in 11th grade. He wrestled 250. I wrestled 100, and he wrestled 250. And he was only 18 months older than me. So I had 4 concussions and a fractured skull before I was 8 years old, just from Daniel. So I would get concussions when I was 10, 11, 12. My father's like, I can't afford the $25 deductible. We know the protocol. I'm a football coach. I know the concussion protocol. We're not going to the emergency room. Forget about it. And it was all roughhousing. He'd grab me by the wrist and the ankle. And when I was 3 or 4 years old, he'd spin me around to say, "Hey, Aunt Becky, check it out. Billy's going for an airplane ride." And he'd go to throw me on the couch, and he'd over-rotate that quarter turn, and he threw me into the fireplace instead of throwing me on the couch. And
oh, sure.
He spun me like 4 times and let go and threw me into the fireplace at 4 years old.
All right, let's take another break. And on the topic of boyhood rowdiness, I have a story I'll never forget about learning how to approach girls, which I didn't know how to do when I was 7. And my dad put me straight. And again, Donna, if you're out there somewhere listening, I'm sorry. And I still love you. I hope you're okay. Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us on American Badass. Today we have Billy Baldwin on the show. Before the break, Billy and I got onto the topic of, raising children, sons in particular, and how we grew up as boys, how our fathers raised us, and how different it is today. It's quite a lot different. Times have certainly changed, let me tell you. Yeah, I'd go down the stairs. That was one of his, he seemed to think that was a good punishment, but I'd get thrown down the stairs, and then he would just kind of turn around and walk away like nothing happened. And I mean, it was like so shocking. I remember that now, and I think back to these days, and I shot this girl in the back with a wrist rocket slingshot when I was in like second grade.
Yeah,
it was in winter time, and she had a big coat on, and I had a crush on her, and she wouldn't talk to me, and I had a wrist rocket slingshot, and I used to hide it in the bushes out in front of the church, right? And I knew the way that she walked home from school, and her name was Donna, and I used to say, hey Donna, and she would never answer me, and she'd just keep walking, and so I loaded up that rocket, man, and I let one go. And it got her like in the back, but she had a big, thick winter coat on, so she wasn't hurt or nothing. But because it actually hit her, I thought, oh shit, man. Oh, wow. I'm fucking in trouble now. Right. So I ran home, and I went home, and about an hour later, there's a knock on the door. And I know you were describing a screen door, like in New York, in Chicago. We had the metal door that had metal on the bottom and then a screen on the top, right?
Yeah, it was like plexiglass in the winter, and then you change it to a screen in the summer, right?
And this guy is knocking on the door, and I thought, oh, God. And I could see the front door from the top of the stairs by my bedroom. And I come out there, and I was looking, and here comes my dad. I remember he had a white T-shirt on. He had these like khaki-colored fire pants, his firehouse pants. And he walks over, and he opened the door, and there was this man standing there, and there's Donna standing right behind him, and she had her hand on her cheek, and she was crying, and I realized, oh my God, it's her with her father. And the guy started yelling at my dad, like, your son, blah, 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 and my dad, he just kind of stood there, really just listened to the guy, just let him have his say. But then the guy started getting louder and louder and more abusive about it. And all of a sudden, my father, he just put his hands up in front like that. And he pushed both his hands right through the screen door, right into the guy's chest. And he sent the poor guy down the stairs, like ass over backwards, fell down the stairs. And I was like, oh my God, wow. And then he turned around and he closed the door. Poof. And he just slowly walked back out of the room, back in the kitchen. And the guy didn't come back and knock back on the door. He didn't come back up. But I thought, wow, wow, my dad's a hero. He saved me from this guy. But then he came up in my bedroom
of course.
Later, and he picked me up by the arm, under the armpit, which is a weird way to pick up a kid. And he socked me, knocked me out. And but I had it coming, right? And
totally.
I
the
respected
same exact story. I won't even repeat the
him.
story. The same exact story happened to my brother Daniel. The girl's name was Patty. He shot her with a BB rifle when she was on her bike, shot her in the back. And the father came over to the house. I don't remember if the girl was there or not. She lived at the end of the block. The father freaked out. My father called Daniel to the front door, said, is it true? And the father said, I want the gun. I want the gun. And my father handed him the gun, and he took it on my front porch and just smashed it was, like a little daisy or something, a little daisy BB rifle. And he smashed the thing into pieces right on my front porch in front of my dad. And he knew my dad. He loved and admired and respected. And my father probably intimidated him. This is not a situation where my father wanted to get into. This guy didn't want to get into anything physically, but the guy kind of like lost control because the girl was riding home on her bike. And Daniel, he didn't break the skin or anything, but he left a little mark on her back. She was summertime wearing a T-shirt from, 100 feet away. And, left a little mark and made her cry, scared.
Sure.
And he smashed the thing. I'll tell you one more story about my dad that's pretty funny. that when I used to get, the first couple of people that I was forced to get into a fight with, I didn't really, for various reasons, I couldn't really do very well because I didn't know how to fight. One of them was my brother because he was tough and he was crazy and he was twice my size. The other one was a kid that was my neighbor that fought very dirty. He'd scratch, he'd bite, he'd like scratch, he'd gouge your eyes and stuff. And this third guy was on the kindergarten bus, and I would always come home with like torn homework and buttons ripped off my shirt because this guy was bullying everybody, not just me, just whoever looked at him the wrong way. He just loved going up and down the aisle of the bus. Yeah. I was only bused 1 year. It was mandatory busing for kindergartners, and then after that, from first grade through sixth grade at this elementary school, I walked. Pretty long walk. But this kid during kindergarten, his name was Donald Johnston, and he was the son of a construction worker in New York City. And I would tell my mom, kindergarten was like a half a day, and my dad was still up at the high school. And I would tell my mom, like, what happened? And my artwork was torn, and my shirt was ripped, and I'd have like a scratch on my face. And I would tell her this kid would bully me. So my brothers and my father sat me down and said, next time he does it, this is what you do. And they were trying to teach me a couple of moves. So I'm coming off the bus and I walk down the length of the bus and I'm dropping down into the well where you drop out of the bus to leave. The doors open. I drop into the well and I lean over the top of the staircase and I go, Donald Johnston's a dick. And I run out the doors and the doors close and the bus starts pulling away. And I look back and I'm like, yeah. And I'm like giving him the finger and he's running to the front of the bus. And I'm like, uh-oh. And he goes down into the wheel well and the bus driver jams on the brakes. The kid's moving in the bus. He's jumped down the staircase and he just pushes the doors open. And he lived like another half a mile away. He lived like 5 more stops on the bus stop. I'm like, holy shit. I start friggin' booking home. I run around the corner. I go across the street. I jump the curb. I hit my front lawn. I look up. This never happened. I look up. My father's standing in the friggin' doorway.
Yeah, there he is.
He's been watching me run from around the corner across the street. I jumped this thing. Donald Johnson's like, it was like one of those animal videos where you see like the freaking cheetah or the lion closing in on an antelope. He was like closing in on his prey. He was about to take me down on the front porch.
Yeah, right.
My father, I stopped and I look over my shoulder. Donald Johnston saw my father. He stopped. And now we're like at this impasse. Like, are we going to fight? He's like, obviously I was thinking, well, like I was a kid. I was 5 or 6 years old. I was like, my dad's here now. We're not going to fight. So my father goes like this.
Boom.
And he walks next door and we had one of those living room curtains. There was like the little drape on the top and then the big drape on the bottom. And there was a little section in between that you could look out.
Yeah.
And my father's standing at the living room window and he's going like this. Like, let's go. Let's go.
Yeah.
And I turn around and I look at him and this guy's now I got my back to my father. He's facing me. He's looking at me and he's looking at my dad. He knows my dad's, I guess he figured out like my dad's not going to let this kid kick my ass right on my front lawn, right in front of my father. So the kid goes, yeah, I'll see you at school tomorrow. Like, kind of like, I'll meet you at the flagpole tough guy. And he took off and he just started walking home. And it was another one of those unspoken things where my father was like, man, I'd rather my son get his ass kicked than my son run. None of my kids are going to run. Exactly. You're never, ever going to run.
Exactly.
Don't ever fucking run.
Yeah.
And I was running. Yeah. I was running. And my father shut the door and he just said, deal with the situation. He's like, let's go, deal with it. He goes, throw a punch, whatever happens. And I kind of felt like we weren't going to fight. I guess I'm making this up in retrospect, but I kind of felt like he would never let me get hurt. And I sort of like clenched my fist and started walking towards him. And he just took off and said, I'll see you tomorrow, Baldwin. And I'll never forget, my father closed the door with Donald Johnston, who he knew had been kicking my ass on the bus. He just closed the door on me, went over to the window, and goes, let's go. Do it. I'm like, really? Yeah. Crazy freaking. But this is what I'm talking about. People, you tell that story, they're like, I would have called Child Protective Services on your father today.
Yeah, there's kids that are suing their parents nowadays. They're taking them to court for this kind of thing. It's really sad, man. It's fucked up. You know, I'm glad you're the dad that you are, and I love hearing these stories. And I love knowing you, and you've been a wonderful friend to me. And I feel sometimes that we play brothers together in a movie, and in a strange way, we kind of really are in another life, because we had similar fathers and
you think about it. You grew up in Chicago, the son of the blue collar, firefighter, and I grew up the son of a public school teacher. A guy who was a football coach and a Marine. And your dad was from Chicago, my dad was from Brooklyn, and a lot of similarities. A lot.
Yeah,
a lot.
It's a wonderful thing, man. And I Jesus, man, I miss you. And it's great that you came on, and I could talk to you forever, Billy. And God bless you, man. God bless you, Billy. Your brothers and your wife and your kids and everybody that you're close to, Billy. I miss you. I love you, and thanks for coming on this.
Same here.
Show.
Let's do chapter 2 whenever you want it in the rotation. I'll come back on, and we've done many projects together. We've had many experiences together, so many stories, so many laughs. And I think we have a couple coming up. We may have a couple coming up in the next few months. We may be together out on the trail again.
I think so.
So
I've heard that.
I'm looking
Bruno.
forward to the next one, my man.
Hey, me too, pal. Me too. You bet your ass I'll be there.
Yeah. Love to the whole family.
Hey,
all right.
back at you.
Okay.
Bill. Back at you, Bill.
All right, man.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Adios. My name is Michael Madsen, and I want to thank everyone out there for tuning in. I hope you all enjoyed listening to Billy and me. He's a great guy, and I've been lucky to work with him and his brother, all his brothers, as a matter of fact, on a few occasions. It's been a pleasure talking with Billy. He's a wonderful guy. He was very open on the show, and it's been wonderful sharing stories of our upbringing. Those are the stories that made us the people we are today. And I couldn't be more grateful for it. We've all had a little more time to reflect on our lives this past year, so why don't you reach out to your loved ones? Or if you're feeling particularly warm and fuzzy after this episode, I encourage you to leave a review and rate the show. Or if you haven't already, subscribe. Watch out and follow American Badass, the podcast, on social media. Thank you, everyone. And that's it. Adios.